The autumn breeze rustled through the perfectly trimmed hedges of Cherry Oak Lane as Andrea Wilson stood in her pristine kitchen, obsessively rearranging the fancy china she'd pulled out for dinner. Her son Blake had called earlier that day with news that made her stomach twist into knots. He was bringing his new girlfriend home to meet the family. "Mom, she's really special," Blake had said, his voice filled with that unmistakable tone of someone in love. "Please just be nice, okay?" Andrea hadn't understood why her son sounded so nervous. After all, she'd always been the perfect host, hadn't she? But as she heard a cart pull into the driveway, she realized exactly why Blake had been so anxious. Through the kitchen window, she watched her son help a young black woman out of the passenger seat. The girl was dressed elegantly in a blue sundress, carrying a homemade dessert in her hands. Andrea's fingers tightened around the edge of the counter until her knuckles turned white. "No, no, no," she whispered to herself, their carefully maintained world starting to crack. This wasn't what she'd imagined for her son. This wasn't what she planned. The doorbell rang, and Andrea jumped like she'd been shocked. She could hear her husband Richard greeting them in the foyer, his warm laugh echoing through the house. Taking a deep breath, she plastered on her company smile and walked toward the front door. "Mom," Blake said, beaming with pride, "this is Zara Washington." "Zara, this is my mom, Andrea." Zara stepped forward with a warm, genuine smile that could have melted ice. "It's so nice to meet you, Mrs. Wilson. I brought my grandmother's famous sweet potato pie. Blake mentioned it's your family's tradition to have dessert after Sunday dinner." Andrea's smile remained frozen in place as she noticed how her son looked at Zara with pure adoration. She saw their intertwined fingers, the way they naturally gravitated toward each other. Her chest tightened. "How thoughtful," Andrea managed, her voice strained. She took the pie without meeting Zara's eyes. "Dinner's almost ready. Blake, why don't you show your friend to the dining room?" "Girlfriend, Mom," Blake corrected firmly, an edge of frustration in his voice. "Zara's my girlfriend." The dinner that followed was an exercise in thinly veiled tension. Andrea picked at her food while Zara tried to make conversation, talking about her work as a pediatric physical therapist, her volunteer work at the local community center, and her close-knit family. "And what does your father do?" Andrea interrupted, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. "Mom," Blake warned, but Zara touched his arm gently. "My father was a marine biologist," Zara answered calmly. "He passed away 3 years ago while doing research work. But he left behind an amazing legacy of scientific publications and conservation efforts." Andrea blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. She'd been ready with judgments, with assumptions, but Zara's quiet dignity made them stick in her throat. The evening continued with Richard and Blake trying to bridge the growing silence, while Andrea retreated further into cold politeness. She watched as Zara helped clear the table without being asked, as she genuinely laughed at Richard's terrible dad jokes, as she looked at Blake with eyes full of honest love. But Andrea wouldn't let go of her prejudices. When Blake and Zara finally left, she barely managed a goodbye, turning away quickly as her son's disappointed face burned into her memory. Later that night, as Andrea lay awake in bed, she couldn't shake the image of her son's happiness, or the way it clashed with her own deep-seated biases. She told herself she was protecting him, that she knew what was best. But somewhere, in a corner of her mind she didn't want to acknowledge, a small voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, she was wrong. Little did Andrea know that this dinner was just the beginning. Life was about to teach her lessons about love, prejudice, and humanity in ways she never could have imagined. And it would all start with a single phone call that would change everything. The phone call came at 2:47 a.m., shattering the quiet of Andrea's bedroom. Her heart jumped as she saw Blake's name on the screen. Nothing good ever came from middle-of-the-night phone calls. "Mom," Blake's voice cracked. "There's been an accident. Zara, she's..." He couldn't finish the sentence. Andrea sat bolt upright, her previous prejudices temporarily forgotten in the face of her son's pain. "Where are you?" "Memorial Hospital." "Mom, please. I need you." Without thinking, Andrea was already pulling on clothes. "I'm on my way." The emergency room was chaos when she arrived. She found Blake pacing in the waiting area, his clothes stained with what looked like coffee and blood. His face was tear-streaked, hands shaking. "What happened?" Andrea asked, maternal instinct taking over as she checked in for injuries. "We were coming back from a late movie. This truck ran a red light, hit the passenger side. Mom, there was so much blood." Blake's voice broke again. Andrea felt her stomach drop. As head nurse of the trauma unit, she knew exactly how serious this could be. "Wait here. Let me see what I can find out." She walked through the double doors, flashing her ID badge. The familiar hospital corridors felt different tonight. Her colleagues looked up as she approached the nurse's station, their expressions a mix of surprise and concern. "Wilson, aren't you off tonight?" her colleague Diane asked. "My son's girlfriend was just brought in. Vehicle collision, passenger side impact." Recognition flickered across Diane's face. "Room 4. Dr. Chen's with her now." Andrea pushed open the door to find organized chaos. Dr. Chen was calling out orders as nurses worked to stabilize their patient. And there was Zara, looking small and broken on the hospital bed. Her beautiful features were marred by cuts and swelling, monitors beeping ominously around her. "BP's dropping," someone called out. Andrea's professional instincts kicked in. Without thinking, she stepped forward, grabbing a pair of gloves. "I can help." Dr. Chen looked up, startled. "Andrea, this is your son's." "I know. Please let me help." For the next several hours, Andrea worked alongside her colleagues, fighting to save Zara's life. She watched as the young woman's vitals stabilized, then crashed, then stabilized again. She saw beyond skin color to the fragile human life they were all desperate to save. During a brief quiet moment, Andrea slipped out to update Blake. She found him exactly where she'd left him, now accompanied by Richard and Zara's mother, Patricia Washington. Patricia stood as Andrea approached, her dignity intact despite the fear in her eyes. "How is my daughter?" Andrea looked at this woman, this mother, and saw her own fear reflected back. "She's stable for now, but critical. The next 24 hours will be crucial." Patricia nodded, then did something unexpected. She reached out and squeezed Andrea's hand. "Thank you for helping take care of my baby." The simple gesture of gratitude hit Andrea like a physical blow. Here was a mother, just like her, facing every parent's worst nightmare. And yet she still found it in her heart to show kindness. Over the next few days, Andrea found herself increasingly involved in Zara's care. She watched as Patricia sat by her daughter's bedside, singing softly and telling stories about Zara's childhood. She saw Blake's unwavering dedication as he split his time between work and hospital visits, never giving up hope. But something else was happening too. As the swelling in Zara's face began to subside, Andrea noticed subtle changes in her appearance. At first, she thought it was just the harsh hospital lighting, but then other staff members began to notice too. "Have you seen this before?" she asked Dr. Chen privately, pointing to the gradually lightening patches of skin around Zara's face and arms. "It's rare, but trauma and certain medications can trigger changes in melanin production. We'll need to monitor it closely." Andrea stood by the window of Zara's room, watching the sun set over the city. She thought about how quickly life could change, how all her prejudices seemed so small in the face of human suffering. She remembered Patricia's kindness, Blake's love, and Zara's fighting spirit. A small sound from the bed made her turn. Zara's eyes were open, confused but aware. "Blake," she whispered. Andrea moved to her side, professional mask slipping. "He'll be here soon, sweetheart. You're going to be okay." As she pressed the call button for the doctor, Andrea realized something had shifted inside her. The woman lying in this bed wasn't just her son's black girlfriend anymore. She was simply Zara, a human being fighting for her life, a daughter, someone her son loved deeply. But as she watched more unusual changes appear on Zara's skin, Andrea couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of an even more extraordinary journey. One that would challenge everything she thought she knew about race, prejudice, and what really matters in life. 2 weeks into Zara's hospital stay, the changes became impossible to ignore. What had started as small patches of lighter skin had spread across her face and arms. The medical team ran test after test, trying to understand the rare condition that was altering her melanin production. Andrea watched it all unfold from a unique position, both as a medical professional and as someone deeply connected to the situation. She noticed how differently some hospital staff began treating Zara as her appearance changed, and it made her increasingly uncomfortable. One morning, while checking Zara's vitals, Andrea overheard two nurses she didn't know well talking just outside the door. "It's the strangest thing," one whispered. "Did you see her admission photo? She looked completely different." "I know. And have you noticed how much more attention she's getting from the doctors now?" Andrea's hands froze on the blood pressure cuff. She looked at Zara, who was pretending to sleep, but whose tensed shoulders revealed she'd heard every word. After the nurses left, Zara opened her eyes. "They think I don't notice," she said quietly. "But I see how people's attitudes are changing. Even Dr. Reynolds, who barely spent 5 minutes with me before, now comes in for lengthy checks." Andrea felt shame wash over her, remembering her own prejudices from just weeks ago. "I'm so sorry, Zara." "You know what's funny?" Zara continued, adjusting herself in the bed. "Nothing about me has changed except my skin color. I'm still the same person who loves strawberry ice cream, who cries at dog rescue videos, who wants to open my own pediatric therapy practice someday." Patricia, who had been napping in the corner chair, spoke up. "Baby, you've always been beautiful inside and out. These people just showing it now? That's their shame to carry, not yours." Andrea busied herself with the medical charts, fighting back tears. She thought about her own transformation, not physical, but something deeper. How many times had she judged people without knowing their dreams, their fears, their humanity? Later that day, during her lunch break, Andrea found herself sitting in the hospital chapel. She wasn't particularly religious, but she needed a quiet place to think. The sound of footsteps made her turn to see Blake entering, looking tired but hopeful. "Mom? Everything okay?" "I've been thinking," Andrea said slowly, "about how wrong I was." "About everything." Blake sat beside her. "You know, when I first met Zara, I was afraid to bring her home. Not because I was ashamed of her, but because I was ashamed of me," Andrea finished. "You were ashamed of how I might react." "But you're here now," Blake said. "You've been here every day, helping her, caring for her." "I see things differently now," Andrea admitted. "The way some people's treatment of her changes with her appearance, it's exactly what I would have done a few weeks ago. And it's horrible." That conversation was interrupted by an urgent page over the hospital speaker system. Andrea rushed back to Zara's room to find Dr. Chen examining her patient. "The transformation is accelerating," he explained. "We need to monitor her closely for any adverse reactions." As days passed, Andrea noticed more subtle changes in how people interacted with Zara. The same nurses who had previously been curt were now chatty and attentive. Doctors who had delegated her care to residents now handled her case personally. Even some patients in the physical therapy room, where Zara took her daily walks, were more inclined to smile and engage in conversation. One afternoon, while helping Zara with her exercises, Andrea couldn't hold back anymore. "How do you stay so strong through all of this?" Zara paused, holding onto the parallel bars. "You know what my dad used to say? Life will show you who people really are. Your job is to show them who you really are. So that's what I'm doing. I'm just being me, regardless of how I look or how people treat me." Andrea thought about those words as she watched Zara continue her exercises. She thought about them when she overheard administrative staff discussing how Zara's case could be good publicity for the hospital. She thought about them during staff meetings when colleagues who had previously ignored her suggestions about patient care were suddenly all ears. The transformation wasn't just happening to Zara's skin, it was revealing the true colors of everyone around her. And for Andrea, it was showing her a truth she had been blind to her entire life. As she left the hospital that evening, Andrea passed by the gift shop's window display. Her reflection showed the same face she'd always known, but inside she felt like a different person. She pulled out her phone and did something she'd been avoiding for weeks. She opened her social media and removed herself from several groups she now realized were filled with harmful prejudices. But life had more lessons in store. As Zara's appearance continued to change, the story began spreading beyond the hospital walls, bringing new challenges and revelations that would force everyone involved to confront their deepest held beliefs about race, identity, and human nature. The morning sun streamed through the hospital windows as Andrea made her rounds. She paused outside Zara's room, overhearing laughter inside. It was a sound that had become increasingly common as Zara recovered, but something about this moment made Andrea stop and listen. And then Zara was saying, "This little boy at therapy yesterday looks at me and says, 'Are you turning into a superhero?' His mom was so embarrassed, but I told him yes, and that my superpower is making people show their true selves." Patricia's warm laugh mixed with Blake's. "Only you could turn this into something positive, baby girl." Andre smiled, remembering how different things had been just a month ago. As she entered the room, she noticed how Zara's appearance had changed even more. The transformation had spread across most of her body now, but her bright smile and kind eyes remained exactly the same. "Mrs. Wilson," Zara greeted warmly. "We were just talking about yesterday's physical therapy session." "Andre," she corrected automatically. "Please, call me Andre." Later that day, during her lunch break, Andre encountered something that shook her to her core. She was walking past the hospital cafe when she overheard two visitors talking. "Did you see that girl in room 412? One woman whispered. "I heard she used to be black. Now look at her, getting the royal treatment. Bet she doesn't have to wait hours to see a doctor anymore." Andre's hand tightened around her coffee cup. A month ago, she might have had similar thoughts. Now they made her feel sick. "Excuse me," she found herself saying, turning to face the women. "That girl you're talking about, her name is Zara. She's a pediatric physical therapist who spends her free time helping children with disabilities. She's also my son's girlfriend, and she's taught me more about humanity in the past month than I've learned in my entire life." The women stared at her, mouths open in shock. Andrea walked away, her hands shaking but her head held high. When she returned to Zara's room for afternoon checks, she found her sitting up in bed, looking through old photos on her phone with Blake. "Look at this one," Zara was saying. "My high school graduation. Dad was so proud. He kept telling everyone his daughter was going to change the world." Andre looked at the photo of a younger Zara, her dark skin glowing with happiness as she hugged her father. "He was right," Andre said softly. Both Blake and Zara looked up, surprised by her comment. "You are changing the world." Andre continued, checking Zara's IV. "Maybe not in the way any of us expected, but you're opening eyes, including mine." That evening, during shift change, Andre noticed how the new nurse, Kelly, spent extra time chatting with Zara about her therapy work. The same nurse who, weeks ago, had barely made eye contact during vital checks. "You know what's interesting?" Zara said after Kelly left. "People think they're being nicer now, but they don't realize their niceness is just showing their previous prejudice." Andre sat down in the chair beside her bed. "I was one of those people, Zara. I need to apologize properly for how I treated you at that first dinner." "You're not that person anymore," Zara said simply. "But I was," Andre insisted. "And the worst part is, I didn't even realize how wrong I was. I thought I was protecting Blake, but I was just human." Patricia interrupted from the doorway. "You were human, making human mistakes. The question is, what are you going to do with what you've learned?" The question haunted Andrea through her evening routine. At home, she found herself going through old photo albums. There were pictures of Blake growing up, birthday parties, soccer games, graduations. She realized with a start that in all these photos, spanning years of their lives, there wasn't a single face that didn't look like hers. She had created a bubble, she realized. A carefully maintained world where she never had to confront her own prejudices, and it took this extraordinary situation to make her see it. That night, Andre couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about how she judged Zara based solely on her appearance, while Zara had remained unchanging in her kindness, her intelligence, her love for Blake, everything that actually mattered. The next morning, Andre did something unexpected. She asked Zara if she could sit in on one of her physical therapy sessions with the children who visited her in the hospital. Watching Zara work with a young boy struggling to walk after an accident, Andrea saw pure compassion in action. The boy's parents, who had initially seemed hesitant, were now watching in amazement as their son took his first steps in weeks, encouraged by Zara's gentle guidance. "You're amazing with them," Andrea said afterward. "They don't care what I look like," Zara replied. "They just care that I believe in them." As Andrea watched Zara's continuing physical transformation, she realized she was witnessing two transformations: the obvious external one that everyone could see, and her own internal one that was changing everything she thought she knew about race, prejudice, and human nature. But the biggest challenges were yet to come. As news of Zara's condition spread beyond the hospital walls, both mother and son would face tests they never expected, forcing them to stand up for what they now believed in ways they never imagined possible. The day Zara was scheduled for release from the hospital, Andrea arrived early to help with the discharge paperwork. She found Zara sitting on the edge of her bed, staring at her reflection in her phone screen. "Everything okay?" Andrea asked, setting down her coffee. "Just different," Zara replied. "You know, when I was little, my dad used to tell me stories about chameleons, how they change their colors to survive. Never thought I'd relate to that quite so literally." Andrea sat beside her. "Are you scared about going back out there?" "A little," Zara admitted. "In here, people have gotten used to this." She gestured to her dramatically altered appearance. "Out there, it's going to be like walking into a storm." The words hit Andrea hard. A month ago, she wouldn't have understood. Now, she felt protective, almost fierce about what she knew was coming. Later that morning, as they waited for Blake to arrive with the car, Andrea overheard two of her fellow nurses talking in hushed tones. "It's like a miracle, isn't it?" one whispered. "She looks so normal now." "I know. And she's so well-spoken and educated. Who would have thought?" Andrea's blood boiled. Without thinking, she stepped around the corner. "She was always well-spoken and educated. She has a master's degree in physical therapy. The only thing that's changed is your willingness to see it." The nurses scattered, embarrassed at being caught. Patricia, who had witnessed the exchange, touched Andrea's arm. "You're learning," she said simply. The first few days after Zara's release were eye-opening for everyone. Andrea invited Zara and Patricia to stay at her house while Zara continued outpatient treatment. Blake practically moved back home too, turning the Wilson residence into an unexpected melting pot of experiences and perspectives. One evening, as they all sat around the dinner table, the same table where that first uncomfortable dinner had taken place, Zara shared stories about her childhood. "My mom used to pack extra cookies in my lunch," she said, passing the salad bowl. "Not for me, but because she knew I always shared with kids who didn't have enough. She taught me that kindness doesn't see color." Patricia wiped a tear. "And your father would say, 'Spread love like butter, generously and on everything.'" Richard, who had been quietly supportive throughout this journey, spoke up. "He sounds like a wise man. I wish I could have met him." "Me too," Andrea found herself saying, and meant it. The real test came when Zara decided to return to work at the Children's Therapy Center. Andrea offered to drive her, worried about how people would react. The transformation in Zara's appearance was now complete, and few would recognize her as the same person. In the parking lot, Zara took a deep breath. "Ready to watch the show?" "I'm right here with you," Andrea assured her. The reactions inside were a study in human nature. The receptionist who had worked with Zara for years did a double take. Some parents pulled their children closer instinctively, while others just looked confused. Then little Tommy, one of Zara's regular patients, came zooming down the hall in his wheelchair. "Miss Zara, you're back." He didn't hesitate, didn't stare, didn't question. He just launched into a story about his new therapy dog, picking up exactly where they'd left off weeks ago. More children followed, limping, wheeling, or being carried by their parents. They didn't care about how Zara looked. They remembered her gentle hands, her encouraging words, her way of making them believe in themselves. "See?" Zara whispered to Andrea. "Children have to be taught to hate. They're born knowing how to love." That evening, Andrea sat in her garden, thinking about all she'd learned. Her phone buzzed with a message from her friend Linda. "Heard rumors about Blake's girlfriend. What's really going on? Still can't believe you're letting them stay with you." Andrea stared at the message for a long time before typing. "I'm not the same person you knew, Linda, and I thank God for that every day." Inside, she could hear laughter. Zara was teaching Blake and Richard how to make her grandmother's sweet potato pie, the same recipe from that first dinner. Patricia was recording it all on her phone, adding her own commentary. Andrea looked at her garden, really looked at it for the first time. Every flower was exactly the same color, planted in perfect rows. Tomorrow, she decided, she would visit the garden center. It was time to add some variety, some new life to this too-perfect space. But as she watched her family, and yes, she now thought of them all as family, through the window, she realized that the biggest barriers weren't the ones in her garden or even in society. They were the walls she'd built in her own heart. And watching those walls crumble, though terrifying, was the most liberating experience of her life. The neighborhood would talk. Her old friends would gossip. Some would judge. But Andrea had learned that the price of prejudice was too high. It cost you your humanity. And that was a price she wasn't willing to pay anymore. As she joined her family in the kitchen, flower dust in the air and laughter echoing off the walls, Andrea knew that this was just the beginning. There were more barriers to break, more minds to open, more hearts to change. But for now, in this moment, love was winning. And that was enough. It started with a local news van parked outside the hospital. Andrea noticed it on her way to work, but didn't think much of it until she saw the reporter interviewing Dr. Chen about a miraculous medical transformation. By lunchtime, Zara's story was running on every local channel. "Are you watching this?" Blake called, his voice tense over the phone. "They're turning her into some kind of sensation. They don't even care about who she is as a person." Andrea watched the coverage from the break room, her stomach turning as reporters speculated about medical miracles and racial transformation. They showed before and after photos without permission, debated the scientific implications, but never once mentioned Zara's work with children, her kindness, her strength. At the therapy center, things weren't much better. Parents who had pulled their children from Zara's care weeks ago were suddenly requesting her specifically. The waiting room buzzed with whispered conversations and not-so-subtle stares. "I don't get it," one mother said loudly. "If she could change, why don't all of them just—" "All of who?" Andrea interrupted, having come to pick up Zara for lunch. "Please, finish that thought. I'd love to hear your solution to a problem that only exists in prejudiced minds." The waiting room fell silent. Andrea felt eyes on her, some shocked, some angry, some ashamed. A year ago, she might have agreed with that mother. Now, the ignorance of it all made her heart ache. That evening, Andrea hosted an impromptu family meeting in her living room. Zara sat between Blake and Patricia, looking tired but determined. "The hospital board wants to do a press conference," she announced. "They think it's a chance to showcase their innovative care and inclusive environment." "You don't owe them anything," Patricia said firmly. "Maybe not," Zara replied, "but I owe it to every person who's ever been judged by their appearance to speak up. This isn't just about me anymore." The press conference was scheduled for the following week. In the days leading up to it, Andrea watched her community split into factions. Her neighbors, who had previously been politely distant, now had very loud opinions. The Hendersons next door suddenly became overly friendly, inviting them to barbecues and asking if Zara would consider speaking at their church about her journey to acceptance. The Thompsons across the street stopped waving entirely. At the hospital, Andrea's longtime friend and colleague Linda cornered her in the supply closet. "Andy, I'm worried about you," Linda said, using the nickname from their nursing school days. "You're different lately. All this talk about prejudice and privilege, it's not like you." "You're right," Andrea replied, organizing syringes with perhaps more force than necessary. "I am different. I've learned that being like me meant being part of the problem." "But you're losing friends. The hospital board is questioning your objectivity," people are saying. "People said things about Zara too," Andrea cut in. "Horrible, ignorant things. And I used to be one of those people, Linda. The only difference is now I see how wrong I was." The day of the press conference arrived with a media circus. News vans clogged the hospital parking lot. Reporters clutched microphones like weapons. Even a few protesters showed up, though no one was quite sure what they were protesting. Andrea stood in the back of the conference room, watching Zara approach the podium. She looked elegant and composed, every inch the professional therapist she'd always been. Blake held her hand until the last moment, then joined his parents in the front row. "My name is Zara Washington," she began, her voice clear and strong. "You've all heard about my physical transformation. You've seen the pictures, read the speculations, debated the medical implications. But that's not why I'm here today. She paused, looking directly into the cameras. I'm here because in the past 2 months, I've experienced firsthand how differently our society treats people based on appearance. I've watched people who once ignored me suddenly want to be my friend. I've seen children who were pulled from my therapy sessions brought back with apologies. And I've witnessed something even more remarkable, the transformation of hearts and minds. Andrea felt tears in her eyes as Zara continued. But the real miracle isn't my changing appearance. It's the people who learned to see beyond it. People like Andrea Wilson, who had the courage to confront her own prejudices and choose love over fear. The children in my therapy sessions who never saw color, only capability. The nurses and doctors who learned that compassion shouldn't depend on what a patient looks like. The room was dead silent now, every eye fixed on Zara. My father used to say that change begins with one person brave enough to look in the mirror and question their own reflection. So I challenge each of you, look in the mirror. What do you see? More importantly, what don't you see? What judgments do you make before knowing someone's story? What barriers have you built without realizing they're there? After the press conference, as reporters clamored for follow-up interviews, Andrea found herself surrounded by her co-workers. Some avoided her eyes, some wanted to explain themselves, and a few, a precious few, wanted to learn. How do we do better? Asked Kelly, the young nurse who had witnessed her own prejudices through Zara's journey. We start by listening, Andrea replied. Really listening. To stories different from our own. To experiences we've never had. To truths we might not want to hear. That evening, as their expanded family gathered for dinner, Andrea's phone buzzed constantly with messages from old friends either condemning or praising her public stance. She turned it off, choosing instead to focus on the genuine connections around her table. But she knew this was just the beginning. The real work of changing hearts and minds was still ahead, and it would take more courage than she ever needed before. Because sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought against others, but against the prejudices we've carried so long we've forgotten they're there. 6 months after the press conference, Andrea stood in her transformed garden. Where once there had been only white roses in perfect rows, now a rainbow of flowers bloomed, wild and beautiful in their diversity. It seemed fitting, given how much had changed. The sound of children laughing drew her attention to the backyard, where Zara was hosting a therapy session for some of her young patients. She'd turned the space into an outdoor therapy center on weekends, creating a place where children of all backgrounds could heal and grow together. Miss Zara called out a little girl using arm crutches. Look, I made it all the way across. That's amazing, Lucy, Zara cheered, her face glowing with pride. Her appearance had stabilized months ago, but what truly shone was her unchanged spirit. Andrea watched as parents chatted comfortably on the patio, families who might never have crossed paths before now sharing coffee and parenting tips. It hadn't been an easy journey to this point. There had been costs, but also unprecedented rewards. The hospital had undergone its own transformation. After Zara's story gained national attention, the board implemented mandatory sensitivity training. Andrea, surprisingly, had been asked to help develop the program. Her first-hand experience with confronting and overcoming prejudice made her uniquely qualified. You know what the best part is? She'd told Blake recently. People actually want to learn. They're uncomfortable, yes, but they're trying. That's more than I ever did before. Inside the house, Patricia was organizing supplies for next week's community workshop. They'd started a monthly series called Beyond Appearances, where people could share their experiences with prejudice and work together to create change. Andrea, Patricia called from the kitchen. The community center called. They want to know if you'll speak at next month's event. Me. Andrea paused, still surprised when people wanted to hear her story. What would I even say? Tell them the truth, Richard suggested, helping to sort pamphlets. Tell them how it feels to wake up and realize you've been wrong your whole life. Tell them it's never too late to change. The doorbell rang, and Blake went to answer it. He returned with Linda, Andrea's former friend who had distanced herself after the press conference. I've been doing a lot of thinking, Linda said, fidgeting with her purse strap. And I've been watching how happy you all are, how much good you're doing in the community. I was wrong, Andy. About everything, Can you teach me how to do better?" Andrea hugged her old friend, remembering her own journey. "We're all learning together," she said. Later that evening, as the extended family gathered for their now traditional Sunday dinner, Andrea looked around the table. Blake and Zara sat close together, their love having grown stronger through all the challenges. Patricia and Richard were debating the best way to expand the therapy garden. Linda was getting to know everyone, slowly letting go of her preconceptions. "I have something to announce," Zara said during dessert. "The Children's Hospital offered me a position to head their new inclusive therapy program. They want to ensure every child, regardless of background, gets equal access to care." "That's wonderful," Andrea exclaimed, then noticed Zara and Blake exchanging glances. "There's more, isn't there?" "Well," Blake grinned, reaching for Zara's hand. "We're also getting married. And Mom, we want you to help plan the wedding." Andrea felt tears forming. A year ago, she would have been horrified at the idea. Now, she couldn't imagine anything more perfect. "I'd be honored," she managed to say. As everybody celebrated, Andrea slipped away to the garden for a moment of reflection. The evening sun cast long shadows across her newly diverse flower beds. She thought about how far they'd all come, how far she'd come. A soft voice behind her said, "Penny for your thoughts." It was Dora, holding 2 cups of tea. She handed one to Andrea. "I was just thinking," Andrea said, "about that first dinner. How scared I was of everything different, everything I didn't understand. And now look at us. Life has a funny way of teaching us exactly what we need to learn," Zara smiled. "Sometimes it just takes an unexpected journey to get there." Inside, they could hear the others laughing, making plans, living life as the family they'd become. The neighborhood had changed too. More diverse families had moved in, drawn by the sense of community they'd created. The therapy center had a waiting list of parents wanting their children to experience Zara's inclusive approach to healing. "You know what I've learned?" Andrea said, sipping her tea. "Love isn't about color or appearance or any of those things I used to think mattered. It's about having the courage to see people, really see them for who they are inside." As they walked back inside to join their family, Andrea felt a deep sense of peace. The journey hadn't ended. There would always be more hearts to open, more minds to change, more love to share. But they would face it together, as a family that had learned the most valuable lesson of all, that true beauty, true worth, and true love know no boundaries. The sun set on their garden, where flowers of every color bloomed side by side, different yet equally beautiful, just like the family that had grown in ways no one could have predicted, and all the better for it.